Clara Johansson stood at the edge of the collapsed well and looked down into the darkness that had swallowed her inheritance. The well was 20 feet deep and 8 feet wide, lined with stones that her father had hauled from a creek bed 3 miles away. It had taken him 2 summers to dig it, 2 summers of back-breaking work while her mother cooked meals over an open fire, and Clara carried water from the neighbor's spring a mile to the east. The well was supposed to be the foundation of their homestead, the thing that would make the land worth something. The reason they had come all the way from Minnesota to claim 40 acres of Nebraska prairie. Now the sides had collapsed, the stones had tumbled inward, and Clara's father was buried somewhere in the rubble along with every dream her family had ever had. "I'm sorry for your loss," Silas Drummond said, standing behind her with his silver hair gleaming in the October sun. His voice was soft, sympathetic, but his eyes were calculating the value of the land he had sold her father 3 years ago. "Your father was a good man, a hard worker. It's a shame the well gave out like that." "The well didn't give out. The stones shifted after the rain last week. He was down there trying to fix it when they fell. A tragedy either way." Drummond stepped closer, close enough that Clara could smell the pomade in his hair and the whiskey on his breath. "I don't suppose you have any family left? Anyone who could help you work the claim?" "My mother died last winter. My brother died at Shiloh. There's no one." "Then perhaps you should consider selling. I could offer you $50 for the land. It's more than fair, given the circumstances." A young woman alone, with winter coming, with no well and no house, and no way to prove up the claim. He spread his hands in a gesture of false helpfulness. $50 would get you back to Minnesota, get you started somewhere else, somewhere more suitable for a woman on her own. Clara looked at the collapsed well, at the pile of stones that had killed her father, at the land that stretched away in every direction without a tree or a building or anything that might offer shelter from the winter that was coming. Drummond was right about one thing. She had nothing. No money, no lumber, no way to build the cabin she would need to survive until spring. The land office required improvements, a dwelling, cultivation, residence, and she had none of those things and no way to get them. But $50 was an insult. Her father had paid $200 for this land, had spent 3 years of his life trying to make it into something, had died in a hole in the ground trying to give his daughter a future. $50 wouldn't even cover the cost of his coffin. "I'll think about it," she said, because she didn't have the strength to argue. "Don't think too long. Winter's coming, and land without a dwelling isn't worth anything to anyone." Drummond tipped his hat and walked back to his wagon, leaving Clara alone with the collapsed well and the cold October wind. She found old Ezra 2 days later at the general store in town, buying rope and candles and the supplies a man needed when he was planning to go underground. He was 70 years old, if he was a day, with white hair and skin the color of weathered oak, and hands that looked like they had been carved from the same wood. He had been a slave in Virginia before the war, had dug wells and cellars and graves across 3 states, had come to Nebraska after emancipation because he had heard the land was free and the past couldn't follow him here. "I heard about your father," he said, not looking up from the rope he was examining. "I'm sorry. He was one of the few white men in this county who ever treated me like a person." "Thank you. He spoke well of you, too." Clara hesitated, not sure how to ask what she needed to ask. "Mr. Ezra, I need to know something about that well, about what's down there." What's down there is 20 feet of hole lined with stones that collapsed and killed a good man. I know that, but I need to know if the bottom is stable, if the water is still there, if someone could—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Old Ezra finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with an expression that was part curiosity and part something else. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You're thinking about going down there. I'm thinking about living down there." He was quiet for a long moment, the rope forgotten in his hands. Then he laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but the kind of laugh that comes from surprise, from hearing something you didn't expect from someone you had underestimated. "Well now," he said, "that's the craziest thing I've heard all year, and the smartest. Stay with me, because what old Ezra taught her is the reason Clara survived the worst winter in Nebraska history, while the people who thought she was crazy froze in their wooden shacks above ground. The well was still structurally sound at the bottom. That was the first thing Ezra determined when he climbed down the rope ladder and spent an hour examining the walls, the floor, the water that still trickled from a spring in the limestone bedrock. The collapse was at the top, he explained, hauling himself back up hand over hand with a strength that seemed impossible for a man his age. The stone shifted when the rain softened the soil, but the bottom 10 feet are solid, cut right into the rock. Your father knew what he was doing when he dug this deep. He hit the limestone shelf, and that's what's holding everything together. So, I could live down there? You could do more than live. You could be comfortable." Ezra sat on the edge of the well, catching his breath, his legs dangling into the darkness below. 20 feet down, the earth stays the same temperature all year round. 55 degrees in winter, 55 degrees in summer. It doesn't matter what the air does above. Down in the rock, everything is constant. 55 degrees isn't warm. 55 degrees isn't freezing. And when you add a small fire, some blankets, a proper roof over the top, he smiled, showing teeth that were still strong despite his years. "I've seen people live in worse. I've lived in worse myself, back when living in worse was better than the alternative." They spent 3 weeks preparing the well for habitation, working from dawn until dark, racing against the cold that was coming. Ezra taught her how to clear the collapsed stones, lowering himself down on the rope each morning with the patience of a man who had spent his life underground. He sorted the stones into piles, the ones that could be reused for walls, the ones that were too cracked to trust, the ones that would become part of the floor. "Your father built this well strong," he said one afternoon, running his hands along the limestone walls. The stones he used for the lining were good ones, cut square, fitted tight. Most of them survived the collapse. We can use them again. Clara learned to lower herself down the rope, to work in the dim light that filtered from above, to trust the walls of stone that surrounded her. It was strange at first, living in the hole where her father had died, but Ezra helped her see it differently. Her father had built this well. His labor was in every stone, every carefully fitted joint, every foot of depth he had carved from the Nebraska earth. Living here wasn't abandoning his memory. It was completing what he had started. They built a wooden platform halfway down, using lumber that Ezra had salvaged from an abandoned homestead 20 miles to the west. The platform created a second level that would serve as the main living space, with storage below in the wet bottom of the well, and a crawl space above that would help insulate against the cold. The platform was solid, built to last, supported by beams wedged into notches they had cut in the stone walls. The walls of the well became the walls of her home. Clara mixed mud and straw and plastered them smooth, filling every gap between the stones, creating a surface that would hold heat instead of letting it escape into the earth. She built a small hearth at one side, with a chimney that rose straight up through the well shaft and out into the air above. The draft was perfect, the smoke rising naturally, the heat radiating into the stone walls and warming them like bread in an oven. The roof was the hardest part. She couldn't afford lumber, couldn't afford anything except what she could find or make herself. So she built a frame from branches, covered it with layers of sod and earth, piled more branches on top for insulation, and finished it with a layer of clay that hardened into something almost like cement. When she was done, the roof was 3 feet thick, and the only sign that anyone lived beneath it was the chimney pipe poking up through the prairie grass. She moved in on November 3rd, 1871, climbing down the ladder into the home she had built 20 feet below the surface of the land her father had died trying to claim. The well was dark, lit only by the fire in the hearth and a few candles she had made from tallow. But it was warm, 55 degrees from the earth itself, climbing toward 60 when the fire burned, staying above 50 even when the flames died down to coals. She had done it. She had built a dwelling on her claim, had met the requirements of the Homestead Act, had created a home where everyone said a home was impossible. All she had to do now was survive until spring. Word spread through the county about the Johansson girl living in the collapsed well. Some people thought she had lost her mind with grief, that she was living in the hole where her father had died because she couldn't accept that he was gone. Others thought it was a publicity stunt, a way to get sympathy from the land office so they wouldn't enforce the improvement requirements. A few thought she would be dead within a month, frozen or suffocated or simply gone mad from living in the dark like a mole. Silas Drummond heard the rumors and decided to see for himself. He rode out to the claim on a November afternoon, expecting to find a pile of dirt and a crazy woman, expecting to finally close the deal he had been planning since before Clara's father was even cold in the ground. He found the well sealed over with a thick roof of sod and clay, smoke rising from a pipe in the center, and no sign of Clara anywhere on the surface. He circled the well twice, looking for an entrance, before he finally noticed the wooden hatch set into the ground 10 feet away, connected to the well by a tunnel she had dug through the Nebraska soil. "Miss Johansson," he called, knocking on the hatch. "Are you down there?" The hatch opened, and Clara's face appeared in the darkness below, lit by the glow of her fire. Her ash-blonde braid was dusty with soil. Her pale blue eyes were calm, and she was wearing a light dress despite the November cold, because 20 feet underground, the temperature was always the same. "Mr. Drummond, what brings you to my home?" Drummond stared at the hatch, at the tunnel, at the smoke rising from the chimney above the well. "This isn't a home. This is a hole in the ground. It's a dwelling. The Homestead Act requires a dwelling of at least 10 by 12 feet. My home is 8 feet in diameter and 20 feet deep. That's more than 120 square feet of living space, which exceeds the requirement by a considerable margin. The law means a proper house, a cabin, something above ground. The law means a dwelling. It doesn't specify above ground or below ground. It doesn't specify wood or stone or sod or anything else. It just says dwelling." Clara smiled, the first real smile she had managed since her father died. "I've already filed the paperwork with the land office. They've accepted my claim. This dwelling counts." Drummond's face went red, then white, then a mottled combination of both. He had been waiting 3 years for this land to fail. 3 years for the Johansson family to give up so he could buy the claim back for a fraction of what he had sold it for. He had watched the mother die, had watched the father die, had offered the daughter $50 for 40 acres that would be worth $500 once the railroad came through. And now she was living in a hole in the ground, and the hole was legally a dwelling, and there was nothing he could do about it. "You can't survive the winter down there," he said. "You'll freeze, you'll starve, you'll go mad from the darkness. I have food stored below, enough to last until April. I have a fire that burns half the fuel of any stove above ground, because the earth holds the heat. I have water from the spring that never freezes because it comes from deep in the limestone." Clara's voice was steady, almost pleasant. "And I have 55 degrees of constant temperature, which is a lot more than you'll have when the January blizzards come and your fancy house in town loses its roof." Drummond left without another word. He rode back to town and told everyone who would listen that the Johansson girl had lost her mind, that she was living like an animal, that she would be dead by Christmas and good riddance to her and her worthless claim. The winter of 1871 to 1872 was the worst anyone could remember. The blizzard started in December and didn't stop until March, burying the prairie under 6 feet of snow, driving temperatures down to 30 below, killing cattle and horses and people who had thought they were prepared but weren't. 3 families in the county lost their homes to the storms. Roofs collapsed under the weight of the snow. Walls gave way when the wind found weak points. Fires burned out of control when desperate people pushed their stoves too hard, trying to fight the impossible cold. The general store in town ran out of firewood by January, and people started burning fence posts, then furniture, then anything that would catch fire and give them a few more hours of warmth. Clara Johansson sat in her well and listened to the wind howl 20 feet above her head. The storms couldn't touch her. The snow couldn't reach her. The cold that was killing people in their wooden cabins couldn't find its way down through 20 feet of earth and stone. She kept her fire burning low, just enough to raise the temperature from 55 to 60, just enough to cook her meals and heat her water and keep the darkness at bay. She had candles that she made herself from tallow, and she had a small window she had cut into the hatch above, covered with greased paper that let in enough light to read by on clear days. The temperature in her underground home never dropped below 52 degrees, even on the coldest nights, even when she let her fire burn down to nothing but coals. She had food she had stored in the cool bottom of the well, where the temperature stayed constant and nothing spoiled. She had water from the spring that trickled through the limestone, water that came from so deep in the earth that it never froze no matter what the surface did. She had everything she needed to survive, and she had built it all herself from a collapsed well that everyone said was worthless. Old Ezra came to visit her in February, climbing down the ladder with a bag of cornmeal and a bottle of something he said was medicine, but was clearly whiskey. He sat by her fire and warmed his hands and looked around at the plastered walls, the wooden platform, the home she had carved out of the earth. "You did good," he said. "Better than good. This is the warmest place I've been all winter. I had a good teacher. I showed you the idea. The work was yours." He took a long drink from the bottle and passed it to her. Drummond's been telling everyone you'll be dead by spring. He's been telling everyone this claim will be his before the snow melts. Let him talk. I'll be here when the snow melts, and I'll be here when the railroad comes through, and I'll be here when this land is worth 10 times what he paid for it. Clara took a drink of the whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat and warm her from the inside. My father died trying to build something on this land. I'm not going to let his death mean nothing. She proved up her claim in the spring of 1873, having met all the requirements of the Homestead Act: 5 years of residence, cultivation of the land, construction of a dwelling. The land office inspector came out to see her home, climbed down into the well, and spent an hour examining the construction. He left shaking his head, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had done everything right in a way he had never seen before. The railroad came through in 1876, just like everyone had predicted. Silas Drummond tried to buy Clara's land one more time, offering her $500 for the 40 acres he had sold her father for $200. She refused. By 1880, the land was worth $2,000, and Clara had built a proper house above ground, using the well as a root cellar and storm shelter for the frame farmhouse that stood where her father had dreamed of building. Old Ezra died in the winter of 1879, peacefully in the cabin Clara had helped him build on a corner of her land. She buried him beside her father in the small cemetery she had started on the north edge of the property, and she marked his grave with a stone that said simply, "He taught me to go down when everyone else looked up." Clara Johansson lived on that land for another 53 years, raising 3 children, burying 2 husbands, watching the prairie transform from wilderness to farmland to something that almost resembled civilization. The underground home was eventually filled in, the well sealed over, the evidence of her first desperate year buried beneath decades of normal life. But the story survived. People told it at church socials and county fairs. The tale of the young woman who inherited nothing but a collapsed well and climbed down into it and built a house 20 feet below the surface. They told it as a joke sometimes, as an example of prairie madness, as proof that the early settlers were crazy in ways that modern people couldn't understand. But a few of them told it the right way, as a story about survival, about refusing to give up, about finding possibility where everyone else saw only failure. They told it as a story about a woman who went down when the world pushed her down and found that down was exactly where she needed to be. Some stories end with the protagonist rising above her circumstances. This one ends with something deeper. A woman who went below her circumstances, who built a home in a hole in the ground, who survived by going where the cold couldn't follow and the wind couldn't reach. If this story of underground warmth resonated with you, consider subscribing for more narratives of buried wisdom. What is the collapsed well in your own life? And what would happen if you climbed down instead of walking away?